My name is Zita Kakalejčíková. I am the project manager of this project, and I would like to welcome you all at this conference. With this conference, we would like to honor the cooperation of the past 10 years we have had with USAID, and therefore we would like to open the conference with two opening speeches. I am having with me two distinguished guests that will open up the conference. I am having with me Lisa Magnow. Lisa is the Deputy Assistant Administrator at the Bureau for Europe and Eurasia at the USAID. And I am also having with me Rick Hathaway, who is the Area Vice President of Habitat for Humanity International Area Office for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Therefore, I don't want to take more of your time. I would like to give the floor now to Lisa to open up the conference. Lisa, please.
Thank you, Zita, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone from Washington, D.C., and good afternoon to colleagues in Europe. I'm very pleased to help kick off this conference, especially on the heels of COP26, where promoting energy efficiency was high on the agenda. USAID is committed to helping the world address the climate crisis and in the process, strengthen the energy security of our partners through initiatives like REELIH. More broadly, our US-Europe Energy Bridge initiative launched last year will advance the clean energy transition and digital transformation of the energy sector in Eastern Europe and Eurasia. It builds on decades of USAID's foundational work. USAID's partnership with utilities in Southeast Europe has led to a 21-fold increase in renewable generation added to the grid since 2005 and put Southeast Europe on track to produce 1/3 of its power from non-hydro renewables by 2030. With continued and targeted support to utilities, our partners may be able to achieve a goal of nearly 50% renewables within the next decade. And while discussions around climate change and energy security can seem lofty or overly technical at times, they are personal to me. I have lived in the Balkans for 6 years, and during that time, I witnessed firsthand how the combination of the climate crisis and dilapidated housing affects people's daily lives. I also understand the many challenges policymakers face in trying to tackle these issues. But while we cannot address the climate crisis overnight, there are some practical solutions that can get us there. Initiatives such as REELIH provide us with one good example. We at USAID see this program as a model for success for many others trying to address climate change. The program doesn't just grant funds, it develops sustainable financing mechanisms. The program is working hard to solve the core issues that limit private uptake of efficiency, bringing solutions to financial institutions and citizens alike. Unless there are appropriate incentives and risk allocation for all parties to engage, the easier path of grants and soft loans will continue to prevail, leading to splashy project headlines, yet undercutting the private sector engagement we all know is critical to address the climate crisis. This conference is also timely as we all watch energy prices skyrocketing. Developing a sustainable mechanism for financing investments in energy efficiency for residential buildings is critical to alleviating energy poverty. No one should have to choose between being warm in the winter or feeding their children. The goal to reduce CO2 emissions and advance our partners' energy independence can be realized while simultaneously helping vulnerable populations repair their homes and stay warm in the winter and cope with the impact of climate change. I hope you have a chance during this conference to examine the model we have built through our partnership with Habitat and explore opportunities to scale it across the region. Together, we can achieve the commitments at COP26. Nothing is more urgent than addressing climate change, and I wish you all the best with your important work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Lisa, for the great opening speeches and for the wonderful words. I would like to give the floor now to Rick Hathaway. Rick, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zita, and thank you, Lisa, for your great support from USAID and guiding us along the way. Thank you so much. To distinguished speakers from EU institutions, national governments, partners, and conference participants, greetings from Brussels, and on behalf of Habitat for Humanity, I'd like to welcome you to the second regional REELIH conference, which is dedicated to scaling up energy-efficient shelter renovations and alleviating energy poverty across Europe. The maintenance and energy-efficient renovation of owner-occupied multi-apartment buildings in Central and Eastern Europe is one of the biggest housing challenges we face in this region when it comes to affordability, energy poverty, climate change, and air pollution. As we know, a large portion of the population live in multi-apartment buildings where they own their flat but don't have the means for investing into the maintenance and energy efficiency of their currently owned building, nor do they have good supporting structures for collaboration. The result is a deteriorating housing stock and growing energy poverty. From Bratislava to Yerevan, from Warsaw to Skopje, millions of families whose housing situation is unhealthy and unaffordable and lacking proper solutions. Habitat for Humanity and USAID began to cooperate on the renovation of multi-apartment buildings more than 10 years ago. The first program started in North Macedonia, which then launched the REELIH initiative, adding projects in Armenia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. We are very grateful to USAID for the continuous support and innovative thought leadership. In the last decade in these three countries, together we have renovated a number of buildings to demonstrate that it can be done in a variety of markets. Together we also help to challenge and engage key stakeholders. We help municipal and national governments to develop better energy action plans and long-term renovation strategies. Homeowners to collaborate with neighbors and test new technologies, and financing organizations to develop and execute appropriate lending products. And in North Macedonia, Habitat for Humanity established its own maintenance company to set the standard in a new market. And at the regional level, we established a knowledge platform sharing best practices about regional energy efficiency. Our collective efforts and learnings have led us to a better understanding of the ecosystem of residential energy efficiency. To scale up the renovations of multi-apartment buildings, stakeholders will need to reach a greater level of collaboration and collective problem solving. Homeowner associations, municipalities, national governments, financing institutions, construction market players, utility companies, and energy experts. This cooperation does not and will not happen automatically. There are competing interests, priorities, and understanding of potential solutions. There is therefore a need for more mediating and facilitating services to ensure greater collaboration among all the actors, unifying all towards a common, mutually beneficial outcome that ultimately ensures housing affordability, lowering of carbon footprint of buildings, and creating healthier homes for the next generation of Europeans. We have come to realize through the efforts of REELIH the power of this collaboration, and thus our policy request is to include this kind of stakeholder and community facilitation into the technical assistance that national and local governments and the European Union can and should provide. We will be able to significantly scale up the renovation of multi-apartment buildings in this region only if we put the people, the homeowners, at the center, and we provide this complex technical assistance in a sustainable way. This is what we have been doing in the REELIH project, and what we're also testing in the EU-funded COMAC project with partners across the region. I'm very grateful to our colleagues and partners who've worked hard to introduce the notion of residential energy efficiency in Armenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, North Macedonia, and really across Europe, and for advocating for more efficient policies. In recent years, we've been cooperating on this issue with UNECE, which is a key stakeholder in this region when it comes to housing and energy policy. We're so very honored that this conference is part of a series of events within the 11th International Forum on Energy for Sustainable Development. Please also note that this conference is an important part of the 2021 Europe Housing Forum, which also started today, and there'll be several follow-up sessions to the same topic later on Thursday and Friday this week. Please check the website of the forum for key details. Thank you to all the speakers and moderators who are engaged in this conference and who will contribute to this meaningful discussion and exchange of ideas and best practices. And thank you to all of you for sharing your experience and knowledge during these sessions, and more importantly, for the work you do in contributing to more affordable, efficient, and healthier solutions, and for creating hope to inspire a new generation of families living in decent shelter. Thank you for your commitment.
Thank you so much, Rick. And thank you again, Rick and Lisa, for the great opening speeches. Thank you for your constant support. I really believe that these 2 half days that we are having ahead of us will bring fruitful discussions and will bring knowledge sharing among the member states of the EU and the member states and the states outside of EU, because this is really needed and this is really what we at Habitat believe in the knowledge sharing. Therefore, I would like to give the floor now to Stefan Buzarowski, who will be moderating the first session of the day. Stefan, please.
Thank you, Zita, and thank you for the invitation to the organizers to be here, to be present, and to moderate this incredibly interesting session. And I would say also a session that has quite an innovative dialogic format, in which we will first look at some pieces of work that have been done by the Habitat Network and by REELIH, by BPIE, and so on. And then we will, in the second part of the session, look for comments, for remarks from a range of distinguished speakers, as of also in the first session. So basically, the REELIH project that's been happening by HFHI and USAID, you heard about it. It's been looking at models to scale up energy efficiency renovations of multi-apartment buildings. And so now in this first part of the session, I will invite our distinguished speakers, Eva Gerahazi from the Metropolitan Research Institute, and also Senta Schmarsberger from Buildings Performance Institute, to give us some comments on this research that's been happening. And then further, we will then look at some of the policy recommendations from the work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I will start, let's say, a kind of presentation, which I sent some days ago. So if it is possible to share with the audience, I would be grateful. Thank you very much. Okay, so 2 years ago, we completed a study for Habitat for Humanity about the links between energy poverty and the REELIH project. So how much the REELIH project, by encouraging the renovation of privately owned multi-apartment buildings, were able to contribute to the reduction of energy poverty. So how efficient these tools were in this regard. And when we made these investigations, we found on the field that there are, of course, many problems with this issue. One of the problems are just coming from the basement, let's say, about interpreting energy poverty, what it means in these 3 countries, so Armenia, Bosnia, and Northern Macedonia. We found that even energy poverty indicators are very hard to interpret because of the conditions. Not only because of the fact that there are missing data. For example, one of the indicators which are analyzed throughout a European survey is only completed in Northern Macedonia and not in the other 2 countries. But also other indicators who deal with energy costs and incomes and see the interaction between the 2. We found that even energy cost might be very misleading because underheating and overheating, it's also a very common phenomenon. So understanding what energy costs mean and the amount of energy costs might be very much misleading because of the heating habits. And also income might be very misleading in countries where the gray economy is very strong and remittances have a very great share. So how you can say that this is the official income of certain households. And this also creates impediments regarding all the social support systems and also regarding creating targeted subsidy schemes. And also what we have found is energy poverty has not only different faces, but also different scales. So as I mentioned to you, the indicators are kind of unreliable, but what we feel is that energy poverty has a wider and bigger share than in other European countries. No one knows exactly, but it can start from 25% to even 70% in Armenia. So we can even say that majority of the population might be energy poor. So the question here is where you address your policy approaches towards which share of the society. And what we also found is that energy poverty is something which is defined on household level. However, we are acting as REELIH on building level. So practically, there is a mix. There are private owners, and the social composition of these buildings are very, very mixed. There are poor owners, and there are better off owners at the same time. So how you deal with this mixture when you have a majority of energy poor, probably in the buildings? Next slide, please. Next one, please, if it's possible. Thank you very much. So I spoke about the problem of interpreting energy poverty as it is, but we also found that when you would like to have energy efficiency results and you would like to renovate many of the buildings, practically what also REELIH did is that they entered into the market and started to create the ecosystem itself. So practically, energy poverty was one of the issues, but there were even major impediments, as there were practically legislative problems regarding how homeowners associations operate. Practically, there were no joint loans for communities. There were just individual loans, practically to households and to people. Practically, there were no subsidy systems. So everything that was crucially needed for the renovation process was missing. And they entered the market and created the ecosystem. And practically those buildings were able to join into their program, which were, let's say, the better organized, which had the owners who were creditworthy, which could be able to even pay more in the short run because of the bank loans than the ones that they could save on energy costs, if energy costs were metered at all. So what I wanted to say is that entering the market and trying to reach energy efficiency result might go against energy poverty, at least in the first period of creating the ecosystem. And we have to accept that. And this is something that we also found, that under these circumstances, mainstreaming energy efficiency programs have different tools and different targets than creating very targeted and very sensitive energy poverty interventions in these countries. Because first, what you have to do is creating these kind of missing elements of the ecosystems. Otherwise, you will not have results even for any kind of buildings. And that's why the recommendations we have for the public sector, let's say on national and local level, which is on the next slide, is that this is the crucial aim first to creating this very crucial ecosystem, which was also, I think, mentioned by Rick, is that what we need is having a solid legal background for the homeowners association and for the financing schemes. And what we also need is that we have to provide technical and organizational assistance for the homeowners associations, because this is something that is crucially needed, and someone should take the lead in this regard, because it's not only about financing, it's not only about technical parameters, it's about creating communities and encouraging and helping them to take the critical decisions. And in many cases, it's not about energy, it's not about poverty, it's about a common action. So practically, this is what we have learned, very short. And the next slide will be presented by my colleague from BPIE, which is about the European Union's achievements in this regard and how it can be used in our countries, in our REELIH countries. Santa, please.
Thank you, Eva. Yes, I mean, this is just a very short look into European legislation that's ongoing on energy poverty. And obviously, it's also relevant for the energy community as they are looking at implementing EU legislation. Now, energy poverty has taken center stage in the renovation wave, which is part of the Green Deal and is a strategy document, not a legislative document. But actually, the Energy Poverty Observatory is going to be relaunched next week. And of course, it would make sense to expand it to other countries to cover the energy community, for example, to get more data and better data on energy poverty in these countries in order to make sure that the programs that are launched also target the right people. There's an affordable housing initiative with 100 lighthouse project is going to be launched. And I mean, of course, here again, I think we're talking about Central and Eastern Europe a lot, and that includes European Union member countries, but it also includes the energy community countries in the end. And it would be great also for the energy community countries if these affordable housing initiative lighthouse projects would include specific CEE projects as examples that target, for example, the high home ownership in multifamily apartment buildings, which we don't have as much in Western European countries. Standardized industrial solutions are now on the rise in Western Europe, at least, and we know from research that these could also be widely used in Central and Eastern Europe. And technical assistance, Eva already mentioned as one of the keys measures to help energy poor households and owners. On the regulatory side, there will probably be minimum energy performance standards introduced, and these, of course, should target the worst performing buildings, which are often also the buildings that energy poor people live in. So this connection has to be seen and also addressed if MEPs are introduced. So it has to be made sure that MEPs are not introduced alone, but that they have a financially sound and base to them. And that brings me to financing, which is obviously one of the most important levers in reducing energy poverty. We need not subsidies, but help to access the funds that are already there. For example, now in the Fit for 55 package, a social and climate fund has been announced, and 50% of the revenues will come from the ETS on buildings that is supposed to come in Europe, and 50% will come from the member states. So the question is, member states that are already on a tight budget or are not willing to invest in building renovation might not also be willing to invest into the social and climate fund. So I think these are issues that still need to be solved, and I would like to see organizations like Habitat for Humanity, who are heavily involved in working with these energy poor households, also get more involved in the discussions on EU level, and also bring in the views from energy community countries that are important for this legislation, so that these views and these problems and issues that are unique to Central and Eastern Europe are also included in future legislation and in these programs. So one other thing is financing is ESCO models and energy performance contracts, which are often more affordable for energy poor households, but of course need to also be explained and communicated well, and need some kind of ad hoc financing. And then, of course, targeted financial solutions for low-income households. I mean, that's important, but as Eva already said, of course, in a lot of countries, a majority of the population is already energy poor. So it's always the question, who are we targeting, and how can they be reached with the financial means that we're trying to give them? I think that's one of the key problems in Europe and dealing with energy poverty. That's all for me.
Thank you both. That was really comprehensive, really interesting, and it's great to hear an analytical, but also a very practical set of recommendations. I will move on now. So our next speaker is Georgi Sumegi, and I hope I got your name correctly. And Georgi is from Habitat and Humanity, and he will give us some high-level policy recommendations based on the research.
Yes, thank you very much, Stefan, and thanks for the colleagues from MRI and BPI who are our long-term research partners, and to better understand what we are doing on the field, how does that relate to research and data on a larger scale. Next slide, please. So based on our work in the REELIH countries, but also based on our understanding and practice from EU member states, I'd like to present some very high-level policy recommendations how to scale up the renovation of multi-apartment buildings in Central and Eastern Europe, both in EU member states and in the members of the energy community. The very high-level policy context, we believe, is that many EU and even national level documents many times speaks only about supporting social housing, and by which we mean subsidized public rental housing. And for the very well-known historic reasons, this segment of the housing system is practically missing from these countries we are talking about, and that's why we believe it's essential that owner-occupied multi-apartment buildings, the communities who live in these buildings, should get the same policy attention and support what social housing gets in Western and Northern European countries. I think there is some good progress in EU language about that. In the recent report about maximizing the energy efficiency of housing in the EU, where Ciaran Cafe was the rapporteur, there's some good language acknowledging this. Also, the housing report by Kim van Sparentak at the European Parliament acknowledges this difference, but we believe this should be strengthened in other EU policy documents. It's already acknowledged by the recommendations about energy poverty by the European Commission, which was published together with the Renovation Wave document, that there's a need to combine energy policy and social policy because it's very difficult, and as Eva was explaining, it's very difficult to focus only on energy or only on social issues where a huge a big majority of the population is energy poor, and we need more coordination between these policy areas. And also, the experience shows that member states, when they develop their long-term renovation strategies and measures to address energy poverty, many times they are not really ambitious, or they don't really follow up on in implementation what they promised in their strategies and measures, and we ask for that the European Union should guarantee that we have more ambitious strategies and more better implementation of those strategies. Next slide, please. I think Rick Hathaway already mentioned this, and also it was the recommendation by Eva. This is our main policy ask, that we need a very complex technical assistance for homeowner associations or for owner-occupied multi-apartment buildings. Usually when we talk about technical assistance in the framework of the ELENA program or other frameworks, we are talking about project design, financing design, and this aspect of how to reach out to the community, how to raise awareness in the community, how to help the community to make a majority decision so that they can start the investment into renovation usually it's not acknowledged that this is part of technical assistance. And I think we should make it clear that without this complex technical assistance, it's very difficult to scale up renovation of these type of buildings. Next slide, please. Financing was also already mentioned by Eva and Santa. Probably the most important here is the first recommendation. We saw it many countries in the region that there was a subsidy scheme which was available for 1 year or 2 years with a very high level of subsidy, or sometimes in an extreme case in Bulgaria it was 100% subsidy. And then the subsidy dries out, and it really distorts the market and raise unnecessary expectations by homeowners. So it's better to have a long-term, transparent, and smaller subsidy than a very short-term, very high subsidy. And also, it's clear that this challenge is so big that we cannot solve it by relying on subsidies. We really need a market uptake, and for that we have to do a lot of things, which was already mentioned by Eva to a large extent, and subsidies should target really the vulnerable consumers or the lower income groups, not the whole population. And the next slide, please. And I think that's probably also the other very relevant thing next to technical assistance, that we shouldn't underestimate the role of local governments, the role they could play in scaling up renovations, but only if we help them. So they need a lot of funding and capacity building so that they can be these facilitators. They are the best suited to become these facilitators and providing this technical assistance and running awareness raising campaigns, providing subsidies. So there should be a heavy investment in local governments so that they can meet this expectation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to all three speakers. I have to say it's becoming more and more interesting as we are zooming up and up. We started from some very individual, specific case studies from the various countries of these projects, and now we're moving upward to some broad policy recommendations, and this is the theme now. We're going to go even broader over to the European level. Just want to say one thing. I do encourage participants to ask questions via deal room. I know I have questions, I'm sure you all do, and hopefully at the end there will be enough room to answer these questions and to really open up a discussion, given that we have such an amazing lineup of speakers today. On that note, I will now move on to the second part of the session, where I really encourage some of our distinguished speakers, and we have I believe 4 of them, to really reflect on how their institutions address these sorts of challenges, these questions around renovation, multi-apartment buildings, energy poverty, and so on. And in that sense, our first speaker is an MEP, Iskra Mihailova, who is also a member of the European Parliament's Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. So, Iskra, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you hear and see me. So thank you for very interesting presentations. Thank you for very open and honest recommendations, even they touch a higher political level, as you said. But let me try to say that the different political levels are responsible, equally responsible in whole this process. I'll try to begin with the European Parliament, but I'm also from Bulgaria, and in some of the cases, maybe I will put some sentence about the situation in different countries. But I'll begin with this, that I'm glad that your assessment on one of the reports in the European Parliament is enough good. I was a shadow rapporteur on maximizing energy efficiency in European building stocks, and it was very interesting work together with the colleagues and the rapporteur. We tried to put there one important message, and it was about the responsibilities of all the levels of the power. We tried to include the role of the European level, and there our message was that we are looking and we expect to see enough synergy between the policies which are created on the European level. What we mean, the renovation wave initiative, but also energy efficiency directive, and all the other documents, which are, some of them are legislative documents, some of them are strategic documents. But the idea is to see the synergy, because otherwise we'll have a bunch of documents and many ideas which will not be acceptable for the cities and citizens around Europe. What is actually the final goal of the whole legislative process in the European Union. So the recommendation combine the social and energy policy is well accepted in the European Parliament, but we also think that we have to combine the financial policy, all the ways of financing of these processes, together with the social issues and the issues of energy efficiency as a whole in the European Union. And also we think that we have to involve the technological innovations in all this process, because without the innovations in the practices and technique of construction and renovation, without the new materials, without the new solutions in pumping, in heating, in cooling of the buildings, without using the principles of circular economy, we should not achieve the results we are looking for around the whole Europe. So our ambitions on the level of the European Parliament is this: to find the synergy between the different policies, not only social and energy, but also circular economy and innovation and research economy, let us say, because this is part of the economy ecosystem of the European Union. Concerning national level, we strongly invited the national governments to create enough flexible, open, and practical long-term renovation strategies for each one of the member states. Because without this instrument, we cannot expect that the member states can receive the support from different instruments from the European Union. And without these strategies and this flexibility, they cannot be enough open to the expectations of the citizens and to the expectations of the local municipal authorities, which play extremely important role in all these process. And I'm fully agree with the colleagues who shared already this opinion that municipal authorities should be very active and should play the role of the bridge between the organizations of the citizens, homeowners, for example, homeowners associations, or different organizations in different member states, the owners of buildings, and especially in multi-apartment buildings. Municipalities can find out the real target groups which need support, and the municipalities should recognize the measures which are acceptable, appropriate, and more effective in the particular municipality and in particular territory with the particular citizens there. Because without this human approach, with the individual faces in it, we can create a wonderful European policy with the great messages, but we shouldn't achieve any appropriate results. So this is what I can say for now, that we are looking for the responsibilities on each one of the levels. And also I'll include here the technological innovations, because without them we cannot move further. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really insightful and just gives us such a broad but also very critical perspective, understanding the very pressing issues around what we need to do and at the sort of the human level, but also the very wide policy level at the European stage. Our next speaker is Gaspard Demure from the European Commission, from the Director General for Energy, or DG. Gaspard.
So thanks a lot. It's a great privilege to be able to speak to you all. I mean, of course, after the honourable member of the European Parliament, but also colleagues from Habitat for Humanity, BPIE, with whom we work on a regular basis, and also members from member states. A lot has already been said on what the EU is actually doing in terms of legislation and in terms of financing. So I won't be too long on this part. I'll just react on the legal framework and the financing very quickly, and then turn to the long-term innovation strategies to pick up some examples from member states on how the best practices on dealing with multi-apartment buildings. So first of all, on the legal framework, I mean, I fully agree with what has been said by MEP Mihailova on the importance to put together the social dimension, the energy efficiency dimension, and the technological dimension. As was mentioned, we are for the moment revising the energy performance of building directive with a view to publish the review in December. There will be in that context a strong dimension on making sure that there is clarity for investors and for privately owned, for owners of buildings on what will be the obligation in the coming years, and notably through minimum energy performance standards. This is very important to create a predictable framework, and we are working on that very hard. But at the same time, I mean, energy poverty is really at the center of the political agenda. And we have proposed the creation of the Social Climate Fund, where part of the revenues of the ETS extension will be directed. This really goes hand in hand with the revision of the PPD directive. So this should be seen as one single approach, combining important increase in the request, in the legal request, and clarity over the next decades, but at the same time a strong dimension for alleviating energy poverty. Now, as regards subsidies and financing, I fully agree also with what was said before. There is a need for targeted grants at the level of programs, but really also at the level of buildings and local authorities, with a level of granularity that makes it possible to finance the renovation. I just want to say on that member states have been really serious about energy efficient renovation in their national recovery and resilience plans. We now have more insight in the volume of financing that will be available for energy renovation. On the 22 plans that have been adopted, we see that more than 50 billion euros will be devoted to energy efficiency. So this is really very important. This is more than what we used to have through regional funds in the past, financial perspective. And if you add regional fundings, there will be really, for this next 5 years, a very important mass of grants available for boosting energy efficient renovation. We've been working very closely with member states to make sure that these renovations are also not only across the board, but devoted to vulnerable households, so with a strong energy poverty dimension. And we are working with DG Reform to develop a flagship initiative for helping the administrative dimension of the implementation of the recovery plans, really going into the details of the implementation at local level, also on energy poverty. I'll stop there with the kind of overall information on the EU framework and dig into best practices that came from member states through their long-term innovation strategies. My team in DG Enner is looking at these strategies for the moment. We will publish together with the EPPD review a staff working document providing an insight of all the best practices from member states. I would say that most member states for multi-apartment buildings have developed programs that go into two main directions. You have a technological dimension to reduce cost through the industrialization and pre-production of facade and roof elements. This follows a bit the leading role of Netherlands through the Energy Sprong project, but we see that this industrial pre-production of building elements is spreading around now in Europe. We can see that in Germany, for instance, the federal government is promoting also the industrial standardization of buildings element, and there is a support program that will combine this pre-production with the serial refurbishment of apartment blocks, with funding coming from MWI in Germany. We see also that in a number of Central or Baltic countries, you see very targeted programs being developed. We've seen in Slovakia, for instance, the best renovated multi-apartment building competition, and which has been launched, and with an emphasis on comprehensive approach to renovation of multi-apartment building. We think it's a very good example. We've seen also in Slovenia the development of a project office specifically dedicated to energy renovation of multi-apartment buildings. Estonia is also very much into the lead on this, but I see that we have a representative from the Estonian government there will be able to develop on that. But we've noticed the kind of mass renovation of more than 1,100 apartment blocks with pre-constructed elements, and we think it's really a good practice. So we have this technological and industrialized leg, but we also see that many member states are developing projects dedicated to privately owned apartments, and this goes back to the elements that were underlined by Yuri, that we don't need to think only about social housing, but we also have to tackle privately owned apartments. And for that, there is a lot of best practices, notably on split incentives, to try to help owners and tenants to talk to each other and to find a common ground for the financing of the renovation. Countries like Denmark or Finland are very much advanced from that point of view, notably by developing legislation for having predictable sharing of costs and benefits from the renovation through rent acts, where tenants association and owner association are speaking together, creating grids with benefits and costs, and come to an agreement on the best way to share this together. In Finland, you also have, through legislation, the fact that heating costs of rented apartments are usually included in the rent. which makes a strong incentive for owners to reduce the costs of heating upstream, and this is a very strong tool for going forward. I'll stop there with the example of Netherlands, which is putting in place tenant owner obligation and rights related to energy renovation through an agreement between different housing corporation and tenants association. I think we see many of these best practices developing. I'll be very happy to dig more into this different example with you. I'll stop there and stay at your disposal for any question you may have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. That was also very, very insightful. I think the element that you brought around the different types of housing tenure and really foregrounding some of these best practices, which many of our participants might not be aware of, is very helpful and offers an interesting basis for discussion later on. Next, we have a representative from the Director General from the Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiation, and a policy officer from the Support Group for Ukraine in the European Commission. So, Mr. Krzysztof Gielowski.
Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. I hope you can hear me well and see me well. There has been a lot of good things already said, but I should also say that apart from developing good recommendations and gathering all good experience from the EU, the European Commission is also sometimes getting really hands dirty. And that's what I have been busy with since 2014, working for the Support Group for Ukraine and helping with real reforms. And when I say about reforms, energy efficiency in a residential sector, especially in multi-apartment buildings, came very quickly into the spot as one of the key low-hanging fruits that should be captured very quickly. Very quickly means that it will take for probably another 40-50 years. But these things, as some colleagues earlier said, are required and still requires a lot of things to be fixed in the environment around. Itself, it will never happen. So if you make good recommendations, countries, further, if you go outside of the EU to countries like Ukraine, it's not enough just to provide good recommendations and even technical assistance. It's really necessary sometimes to get hands dirty. And I have been working directly with members of the Ukrainian parliament. I'm still working with them, with members of the Ukrainian government and different people which have been coming and going, and different other institutions and even civil society, because the movement of homeowners associations in Ukraine has been a fantastic story in itself. But let me try to capture a few things on the example of what has been happening over there in Ukraine for people who have stopped believing, who have lost hope long time ago. Most of the buildings that were built sometimes 40, 50 years ago, they were never renovated or hardly ever done anything to them. And they were built without thinking about energy efficiency. So obviously, in the situation of very quickly growing prices or tariffs, let's say they don't yet have full pricing, it has become extremely tough and difficult for the population. At certain point in, I think, 2015, the cost of the social policies of providing subsidies to the energy bills of people was reaching 10% of GDP of Ukraine. So Germany would go bankrupt within a few years if they wanted to do something like this. Absolutely crazy. The only solution was to look into systemic change. And let me share my slide, because then it's easier to explain when you see something than just only my face. I hope you can see the slides. Could you please confirm? Hello?
No, we cannot, unfortunately.
Oh, it was possible to see it. I'm sorry. Maybe it will come in a second, because it was possible to see in the just before the meeting. So I don't know. Maybe it will come. I will I will see maybe. Okay, I will continue and I will try to see if I can do something about it. So the Energy Efficiency Fund.
Yes, we can see it now.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. I promise not to show too many slides, just only one and a few photos, just to better describe what has been happening and why. That's most important. So the flagship project of the EU in Ukraine in energy efficiency has been Energy Efficiency Fund. It took 6 years of my hard work and many other people to make it up and running. It took 4 years to establish, and then it has been running now for 2 years. It has been focused on supporting renovations of multi-apartment buildings as a start, with capacity perhaps to cover other types of housing, like single-family buildings or maybe even public buildings sometime in the future. But the focus has been on multi-apartment buildings because these buildings and people living in these buildings have been suffering most. I mean, as I said, most of these buildings have not been renovated. There are some important lessons that we have learned in working with the Ukrainian authorities and stakeholders. And apart from what you said, or some speakers said earlier about the need to combine the social, economic, and technological issues, colleagues, if you go further to the east, you need to see more than this. In Ukraine, I have learned that energy efficiency in multi-apartment buildings and establishing such a fund means fighting corruption, bringing transparency, building up democracy, and empowering people, because people in the East, especially in the ex-Soviet Union, generally speaking, if I can say so, forgive me colleagues who are from these regions, but maybe you can confirm, there's a lot of passivity in the population. Passivity which comes from years or decades of being suppressed by the state and expecting that if something goes wrong, it is the job of the state. It is the job of the ministry to come and repair the roof. And many people in Ukraine still believe this. So the focus of the reform, because was not a project, it is not a project we can start and finish. Most of the projects, even those supported by the EU, they do not really have continuity. This animal has been created to run for at least 40, 50 years, because that's these are the needs. There's 180,000 multi-apartment buildings in Ukraine that would need to be refurbished. Most of them really in dramatic situation. So why homeowners associations have been put in the driving seat? As I said, the anti-corruption and the need for bringing transparency requires looking for rather simplistic solutions, or simple solutions, not simplistic. Because simplistic would be just to give a job for the state, as it used to be in the past, and make the state renovate the buildings, so to have a top-down program to renovate buildings without involvement of people. This is not sustainable and pushes people even further into passivity. So if something goes wrong, they will be still expecting the state to come and do something. Even those apartments in Ukraine were privatized, all of them practically 20 years ago. So here the reform came with a full environment package. So first, we had to go far beyond the EU acquis. That's not something usual for the European Commission to do so, but we had to. And we had to put some conditionalities for the Ukrainian authorities, conditionalities for the EU support to the creation of the Energy Efficiency Fund. And this support so far has been 104 million euros. So it's the biggest energy efficiency project probably outside the EU borders. Plus the government of Germany gained 20 million, and we requested that Ukrainian authorities contribute substantially to the fund, which has been a bit of difficult, but they are contributing. So why this? It was necessary to create the full range of legislation to enable functioning of homeowners associations first. So enabling them to take decisions, creating certain market so that they can choose suppliers of certain services, this comes slowly, and it's not something that everybody in the country likes, because this empowering, of course, brings complexity. It brings some complexity because it's instead of signing one contract with the city, now suppliers need to sign contracts with each homeowners association. That's a bit complicated. But what I can tell you is that why democracy? Because decisions have to come. The decisions have to come by decision of homeowners. Always. And the Energy Efficiency Fund has been created in such a way that it only homeowners associations can apply for support. Even more, there are some conditions for them. They need to bring at least 20% of own funding. Otherwise, there is no ownership, because we know that 100% subsidies, and some colleagues already mentioned this before, it is actually detrimental. Because honestly, if you give 100%, then why not 200? Yeah, so you have to understand that you will invite cheating, you will invite corruption, and there were some attempts or some advice from different donors who had relatively small amounts of support available in Ukraine, saying why not to focus only on the poorest people. Well, there have been some attempts, but immediately we noticed that in Ukraine, some companies started to advertise very quickly, and within, I would say, weeks, telling to the people, we can help you to get a high level of subsidy. And same babushka, so same pensioners were registered in number of different buildings in order to have a certain percentage, minimum 50% of pensioners, to get high level of subsidy. So you have to be careful with this kind of solutions, because instead of doing something good, you actually do something bad. Honestly, most of the buildings are requiring renovations, and they need support, and poor people tend to live in poor buildings. I think that's already sufficient without trying to go further. And social subsidies, that's a system that needs to be reformed itself on its own. And we have been strongly recommending, and the Ukrainian government finally did, monetization of these social subsidies, which has been actually good. So we have been working with financing institutions, because when I came to Ukraine in 2014, loans to homeowners associations were like 25% interest rate. It's impossible to do any project with this kind of interest rates. Now it's 12.5 plus some small fees, so it is going down. Essentially, we decided not to go for subsidization of loans, because then we would be subsidizing banks. And the banks would immediately learn about it and would increase the interest rates. It's very simple. So in principle, the system works on disbursement of grants, because also for the sake of transparency, it's easier to follow the cash flows. And the institution building, we decided that it's necessary to create a new institution from zero, because this would give more security and more chance to introduce modern European practices in corporate governance and modern monitoring and verification system, which has never been for any policy measure in Ukraine before, like this. So we have it now for the Energy Efficiency Fund. So there are lots of other things that have been put in place, like training of energy auditors or specialists, technical designers, creating the market for professional housing managers. Lots of different partners have been working with us on this, including IFC, the World Bank Group, which has been a chosen partner for the European Commission on this project. Here we have been working very hard on developing of the huge set of new legal framework. I have been myself involved directly in drafting of the law on metering and billing of heat and water. Honestly, without proper metering and consumption-based billing, you can forget about energy-saving motivation for energy-saving measures by homeowners. No, you can forget about it. So this was necessary to introduce, and it's still a challenge to have 100% of metering. Institutional capacity has been put together. I should mention that the reform on energy efficiency in the residential sector is not living on its own. It's actually interlinked with other reforms like public administration reform, where we are working with Ukrainian authorities to clarify the roles and jobs of authorities who, like in the ministries, used to, rather than working on policies, they used to deal with business and projects management. So lots of things have to be corrected. And it's always better than rather than ministry doing things which is undoable in such a big country like Ukraine. You have homeowners who are taking the lead, and this way already a movement has been created with these self-aware home owners. And I have to say, many of them are actually ladies. That's a very also interesting feature. I would say 70–80% of leaders of homeowners associations in Ukraine are women. That's also interesting. Who is the driver for the change? And what I should say also that many of them are sometimes even pensioners. There is a superstition in Eastern Europe. I'm generalizing now, going outside of the borders of Ukraine, using the word babushka, sort of as a synonym of pensioner who needs to be helped because this person cannot help itself. This is not true. This is not true. I have spoken myself to many babushkas in the country, and many of them are fantastic and very smart people. Maybe do not know much, but they have lots of time. And I can tell that sometimes they are smarter than some of the people in central administration. Okay, that's a joke. That's a joke. That's not truly fair. But I would say do not underestimate these people. And I said about the impact on democracy building, because decisions to renovate the building usually is also a decision to create homeowners association. And the first decisions are the most difficult ones. And once is usually people, what they do, they first apply for something small, like a small support to do energy audit. And they see it works. And they do something more. They do the next step, which is bigger, and they do the next step, and they grow. And once they grow, they become self-aware, they build democracy, and they see that own decisions, because you need to sometimes to take a loan, you need 75% of people to join together. This is difficult task to gather so many people and make them vote together. That's not easy, but that's something that should be seen probably from behavioral aspects. Anyway, there is lots of supporting instruments that have been put in place, not to let, because you cannot expect people just to do everything themselves. The EU has been funding and implemented by the IFC, a network of regional advisors who on daily basis go around the country and knock on the doors of homeowners associations, make simulations, help them create applications to the Energy Efficiency Fund. UNDP has been, we paid UNDP to run a full program of helping with creation of new homeowners associations, trainings to the people, how to do basic things like accountancy and so on. And finally, you get into full-scale thermal renovations, because the fund, after 4 years, which took to establish it, launched its first call for proposal two years ago. Now it has more than 800 of applications, and to our let's say we are very happy that, let's say, 85% of them are actually deep renovations. We expected that people in Ukraine, they will be going rather for small projects because they don't have own funding so much. But they know how to count, and they found that if they go for deep renovation, they can have much better result. So don't underestimate the smartness of the local people, and we should be really trusting and putting a lot of trust into this system. Honestly, for transparency's sake, when you have a homeowners association with, let's say, 100 households, it's difficult to hide something. People, neighbors watch each other. Once they decide to go for a loan or something like this, they watch each other, and they may see even corruption when there is no corruption. So honestly, what I heard, some anecdote from some colleagues from other financing institutions, was that same project, same construction company, same construction materials tends to be sometimes even 3 times cheaper if ordered directly by homeowners association than ordered by the municipality. So yes, so this is what we have learned. That's why we have put homeowners associations in the driving seat. And now just a few photos of completed projects for your impression. Real cities in Ukraine. It happened in this one I think is Novoyavorsk. I hope you can see the pictures from different cities in Ukraine, what it looks like today. On the left-hand side, what it used to be. On the right-hand side, what it is today. The savings often go around 50%. So you can imagine. I'm sorry for the Ukrainian language on the slides. So this project cost like 6.5 million hryvnias. 30 hryvnias is €1. So these are the scale of projects. It's huge for the people, but they also see a difference when they get it, when they have it done. Sorry for very lengthy talk. Happy to share more stories, probably confirming many of your policy recommendations, which have proven to be true in Ukraine already. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. I think very colorful presentation in every possible way, bringing to light maybe problems, questions that some of us will be familiar with from other contexts, but certainly the scale of what's happening and what you've done is really impressive in Ukraine. We have one final speaker for the day, last but not least, the head of housing policy at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communication in Estonia, Mr. Laurisu.
Yes, hello everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to share Estonian experience. And even though we're trying to be on a let's say broader level, saying that and considering that in Estonia only 1.3 million people are living, which are sometimes smaller than some municipality in some member state, I just have to go or I have to zoom in a bit and be maybe more practical and what are our experience. First of all, I mostly agree with what you all said before. Most of the time, there are some maybe differences, but maybe they are because every member state have some differences with each other. But all in all what has been said is relevant in Estonia, and based on our experience, they work. So. We established, let's say, our system around 15 years ago, and we have been changing it approximately after every 5 years. And so when there was, we had to go around Estonia and tell that energy efficiency is important and renovate your houses. Today we are in a situation where the demand is multiple times higher than supply side. So meaning that in our country some activities are different than in some other countries. So we don't have to organize so many awareness raising campaigns, talk with people anymore so much, because whole society are more aware why the buildings are needed to be renovated. But it hasn't been like that. So the shift came around 7-8 years ago, approximately. So right now we have to deal with the supply side, and the supply side, the market situation, what has been the last year and this year shows that we have quite many problems with that. So meaning the materials, there are not enough materials. The prices are going up. Even though we have some type of materials, we don't have another type. So meaning that all the cycle of the renovation could get hit. so that we can't finish the renovation projects. And the other side is the workforce. There is not enough specialists in the area. So it means that it was said that social and energy policies must be looked together or combined together. I would even say that the workforce and material side should be also added to the whole picture, because even though when you have the demand side, but we don't have enough specialists to renovate them, then there is also a problem. And some other points I just want to pin out. It doesn't mean that they are more important, but just to give another angle, is that the phenomenon beside renovation, it's not a phenomenon, but is the shrinkage. And there are many rural areas which are shrinking quite fast, and the most vulnerable groups of society are living there. So saying that, it means when we talking about renovating some building in that area, it means that we have to somehow help to find for the habitants new apartments and demolish the old ones. So basically, we take 4 half-empty or 25% empty buildings. We move the people in the one building so we can demolish the other 3. And this is totally a different approach, and it needs a lot of resources to deal with that. So meaning that there is no point to help or to renovate the building deeply when we know that after 10 years it will be empty anyway. So these kind of processes need to be taken into account definitely, and it means that this living environment is important, meaning that we shouldn't look only building by building, but we must look on the area level, on the suburban level, but broader level than building, if it's of course possible. And how we have done the system, how to let's say help more the vulnerable groups, or give more help to them who need it more, is that we have divided the grant based on the where the building is situated. And why we have done it? Because there is a strong correlation between the real estate value and the area and income of the people living there. And because we want to try to hold the system very simple, so that we don't have to go in every apartment owner and start to evaluate is it help to he or she needs help more than he or she's neighbor, and etc. So we have divided the grant component, and beside that we have divided the whole pot component, meaning the capital gets less money than the rural areas. And so far the system works quite okay. And the reason why we have established this kind of system is also that because of the legal issues, the apartment association is a legal body, and loan is given to the legal body, not the private owners. So the responsible bank is the legal body, as is the apartment association, and all the grants can apply apartment association. So this is the body. And when we're looking at the future, yes, the prefabricated solution was mentioned. Right now we are in a pilot phase. Around 10 10 apartment buildings are in a procurement stage. So we're trying really, to move towards there also because Estonia is the largest exporter of wooden houses. So we have the know-how in our economy. But right now is the material price thing and the workforce questions, and of course, as it is pilot, the devil is in details, and so we will see what will happen. But we're quite sure that after 1 year we have around 10 apartment buildings which has been renovated using this type of method. And we see that probably the first ones are the larger ones, because just to scale it up and test it, it is still too expensive for the smaller buildings, even with the grant component. And the other innovation, what we have in mind is we are right now establishing this type of, say, housing investment trust. And the idea is to get investments for different development banks, private banks, if they want structural funds money. So we can lend it out to those apartment buildings who are not getting reasonable financing from private banks, even though our government provides up to 80% guarantee. Even then, in some cases in rural areas for the smaller apartment buildings, due to the value of the real estate, the private bank sees the risk is too high. So the governmental intervention is needed. And when we establish this type of, let's say, fund or trust, our aim is to provide longer maturity than it is right now in common. In Estonia, there is common 20 years. The average is, I think, 16 or something. But it's quite common when you do deep renovation, 20 years it's a maturity. But we want to move that towards 30 years. So when you buy your own apartment, you take loan as a private loan 30 years. Why not then for apartment buildings? And doing that, we can get monthly expenses lower for the apartment owners because the maturity is longer. And the other is it goes together with technical innovation. So when we are moving towards these prefabricated solutions, this type of renovation, you don't have to do anything basically around 40 or 50 years because the quality is so much higher with that renovation. So you can design this different type of financial instruments longer and therefore move maybe towards less grant component and more financial component. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So that's another very complimentary presentation, I thought, bringing in a systemic perspective, not just from Estonia, but also from the sense of neighborhoods and from the sense of how we address different types of ownership, different types of build structure, questions of rural urban. So as a whole, I felt we've really tackled across all speakers so many questions, so many themes around energy poverty, apartment buildings, a lot of the ongoing challenges. I want to ask if, okay, I just got an answer. There's no questions from the audience yet, but we do have 20 minutes left. So I do encourage you to ask any of the speakers, of all of the speakers, any kind of questions that you like, because that's the goal of these sessions, to open a dialogue. I do have a question of my own, and I would ask anyone who's interested in the panel to comment on this. And it's based on my own experience of working in this field, where I found that in recent years in particular, but generally, we've had less buy-in from social policy and from housing policy as a whole towards both renovations and energy poverty. And if we look at what's happened at the European level in particular, but also in some local contexts, this has very much been a renovation-led effort, an effort aimed at achieving energy efficiency, an effort aimed at achieving better buildings. But the moment of how do we get people involved through the structures that support them around improved housing, the question of how, for example, we address the rental system, the legal questions around owner occupancy, which is a housing policy question, health as well, but also social policy has been less present and also felt at various levels of governance. So my question to the panel would be, have you encountered these challenges? And if yes, what are some of the ways we can overcome them? How can we get a wider range of decision makers and stakeholders involved in this challenge? Feel free. We can start from, I don't know, we can start from Eva, maybe, and send down to Georgi and some of our other speakers. Please comment.
What I wanted to emphasize also with my presentation, but also basing on my experience, is that I think we should make differences between even member states and even states of the energy community and the member states of the European Union. So I think we have a pressing need from climate point of view. We have to renovate. So it is really a big pressure. And dealing with energy poor households, it's costly, time costly, money costly, needs a lot of transaction costs, needs a lot of energy, needs a lot of human efforts. So this is something that is a little bit against each other somehow on the agenda. And the question is always about the balance and the emphasis. And I think with this Solidarity Fund, the European Union made really big steps ahead. But the question is how to implement it. And I think there is a difference between the countries, as I mentioned in the beginning. I think with regard to this huge transaction cost of dealing with European energy poor people, in those countries where the rate of energy poor people is very high, I think there should be a kind of privilege for the energy efficiency agenda, let's say. And creating the framework and homeowners legislations and bank laws and everything like that, I think it has a preference because you have to have the system and afterwards you can target more efficiently. And in those countries where the product is already on the market, so you can deal with homeowners association, you have the legislations, you have joint loans and everything like that. I think the second step is to deal with more targeted, specific energy poor households. And then the question again comes, because of the transaction cost, let's say, how you define these parts of the population. Whether you define it individually, as energy poverty is a household term, or you define, and I like it very much, what the Estonian colleague mentioned, and it is also used in some other parts of Europe, is that you find other proxies, let's say, so other indicators which provide you a guidance where you can find more homeowners associations that are more in need. And of course, it doesn't mean that you really target on people, but at least you do something with this huge transaction cost of finding those people and providing extra money assistance or something for the most needy. And I think even in these countries where the whole renovation system is more developed, still, I think this kind of economical definition of energy poor might be a way ahead and might create a manageable balance between energy goals and social goals.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment?
I'll just add, maybe, I mean, first of all, I agree with Eva. And then I think for the question of how we can get renovation and deep renovation more into the picture and more into the minds of people, I mean, the main problem, and I think we all agree here, is that we are dealing with people who are making decisions based not on science often, but on their individual situation. And I think we need to make it more clear to them and also to the people who are informing them that there are so many other benefits from this except the energy savings that, I mean, obviously living in a renovated, well-insulated, nice house is so beneficial to everybody. And I think the European Union is also looking more and more at this neighborhood approach and looking at sustainable neighborhoods, and that can also like not only help the people who are living in this renovated building, but like help the entire neighborhood that is getting better. And then of course we need to make sure that there's no gentrification, etc. But I mean, for example, in these owner-occupied buildings, that's not as big as an issue as, for example, when we have a lot of tenants, like in Western Europe often. So I think that's important. And just to add one thing, we did a study, I think 1 or 2 years ago at BPIE on homeowner associations and their laws and regulations. And we realized that that's also such a tricky subject, like how voting occurs within the homeowners association. So is it unanimity, or is it 2/3 or 1/3? And like who, as you said already, like who's responsible for paying back the loan? What are the banks checking? Like, so this is also, I mean, out of that alone, you could make one huge project. So I think there's a lot of issues here, but I think that the main point is to make it more attractive and make people understand more that how many benefits we actually have from living in renovated sustainable buildings, many more than addressing energy poverty, which is just one aspect of these people's lives.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing up all these questions around gentrification as well, and the problem of homeowners associations, which some of them don't really extend into the subsidiarity principle and become a member state issue, which then you have lots of challenges there. I had Lauri and then Christoph raising their hand, and also Iskra. So in that order.
Yes, thank you. Just a short comment that how to motivate apartment association is to provide many pilots which are around the country or municipality, so that the neighbors could envy. So this is quite a large motivator, at least in Estonia. Then the neighbors start to move when they see two beautiful apartment buildings around their apartment buildings. And these apartment associations who are renovating, they get this type of experience of success. And it has, in Estonia, there are many professional apartment association, let's say, board members. This is allowed in our legal system. So you are professional because you know what you do and you spread this knowledge. So pilots, and you have to envy others.
I can fully agree. I think in most of the countries, let's say, example from neighbors is a very powerful example. Having said that, indeed, when you see problems in countries like Ukraine, for example, where people cannot reach an agreement, whether even to create a homeowners association, sometimes, unfortunately, this is because people who are, we call them subsidy recipients, don't call them poor people, because that's not exactly always the same. Subsidy recipients usually are against, because they're afraid that they will just lose the subsidy. And if the state can continue paying the subsidy, why to take the risk? But in Ukraine, the motivating factor has been that very low level of trust in the government. People simply didn't trust that the government will continue the social system as such. And that's why they were thinking long term, saying, well, better to invest in energy efficiency because we don't know if the subsidy can continue. And of course, it has been evolving over a period of time. There was yet another question about the issues of split incentives. I had been several times trying to raise it to members of the Ukrainian parliament, for example. Nobody wants to touch it. Officially, in countries in the East, nobody is renting. Nobody is renting except for the foreigners. That's exactly not to reveal to the taxation authorities, fiscal authorities, that otherwise they would have to pay taxes, so people don't want to pay taxes. But obviously, there's plenty of people who rent apartments. And I was recommending solutions which, honestly, we are not very different in the EU and in different countries. Some colleagues say we have differences. Yes, we have differences, but I would say same problems. Maybe the scale of problems is different, but problems are really similar. And many solutions have been developed in the EU countries, also to the question of split incentives. I think Gaspar was from DGN. I'm actually from DGN myself as well. I'm just only on secondment to Ukraine. So there have been many solutions in the EU countries. that really can apply. The problem is that the wider environment, somebody would need to convince the Minister of Finance that they need to introduce some incentive for the people, first of all, to declare. And this will open a huge possibility, a huge new area of new investments that could follow very quickly. But it's still some work needs to be done, and convincing ministers of finance is not an easy task. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got our honourable MEP next.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'll continue in the same direction, reminding that in our lovely report on maximizing energy efficiency in the building stock, we mentioned after long arguments between all the shadows and the rapporteur, we mentioned that we need a real intensive communication campaign in each one of the member states when we talk about the renovation and energy efficiency. And this is continuation of what the ladies said already. This is absolutely needed. When we speak about the renovation of the building stock, when we speak about energy efficiency, when we try to combine these with the social policy and energy poverty, we actually speak about the style of life and quality of the life of the people. And the information campaign is really important to inform people and give them the reasons to participate in this, to participate in the whole process. It will give reasons to the local authorities to participate more active in the process. And it will be a kind of push for the government authorities, which can involve the whole system. And the role of the media and the people who are creating the community opinion is extremely important in this. Because if we speak about the health of the people, it is very important. If we speak about the quality of the life, it is very important. If we speak about the whole environment in the city or village, or mainly in the cities, if we speak about multi-apartment buildings, it is about the environment in the city and about the whole idea of the development of the territory and the urban areas. So this is a question of communication and question of the right messages, to send the right message, to bring people together on the boat, and be sure that we all together can continue achieving the goals which are in the main idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Gaspar, if you have some comments as well. I noticed you raised your hand for a while.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, just to say that looking at the long-term innovation strategies of member states, we've noticed that the most successful member states on this issue were the ones that could bring together many different policies on the long term. Bringing information campaign, as just mentioned, financing over the long period, minimum energy performance standards, split incentives, technical assistance. So we think it's extremely important to tackle the issue, notably of energy poverty and multi-apartment buildings, to have this long-term perspective and planning. And that's the reason why we have made now, and it's also an answer to the comments of Yuri, the quality of the long-term innovation strategies as one of the enabling conditions for receiving EU fundings, and notably regional funds. So to improve the quality, the planning, and the long-term perspective to this issue, to have a sustained effort on this front. And I'll stop there because I see that there are questions from the room.
Indeed, there is a question that I can see, and it's a question that formulates much better what I was trying to ask, which is by Ivan Tosic from the Metropolitan Research Institute. And it goes back to this issue of, the EU, and we have very little time left, so I would invite one of our EU speakers to comment on this very briefly. The EU can make energy efficient investment compulsory, and we've seen that in the various directives that have happened. Yet it does not really have the power to enforce social directives, social standards due to subsidiarity. So the question is, can there be a sort of solidarity here? Well, if the Solidarity Fund is not sufficient, can there be a way of distributing EU funds directly to municipalities that agree with social protection goals, almost bypassing the national level in this sense? I don't know if anyone wants to comment on this in the 4 minutes that we have left.
Maybe I can try a very short answer, but
Thank you.
Surely we will not bypass member states on social policy. That's for sure. And we will need to work hand in hand with national, local authorities. What we try to do is though to push member states in the context of the Energy Poverty Observatory to come closer on the definition on one end, and also we have made it mandatory to have a section on energy poverty in the long-term innovation strategies, so that member states are obliged to explain what they are doing at national level, also to have a kind of peer review on this, and then in the legislative framework we are pushing for minimum energy performance standards, and in a way this is focusing on low-income households and the section of the building stock which is related to this issue. So it is by combining these different angles that we try to address that, and also through funding and through the recovery plans. I'll stop there to give you the time to give the concluding remarks.
We can't hear you. We can't hear you, Stefan. And
sorry.
And
yes, right. I'm here. I think there might be some other questions, but I cannot see them because I can't actually see what's being asked on the platform on Deal Room. There's been a remark from Talia Broom around the open call for projects under the LIFE call, the Clean Energy Transition program addressing building-related interventions for vulnerable districts. And indeed, I think this is as a comment, I think this is very pertinent, hopefully precisely to incorporate the very broad range of questions that have been raised here, from the need to work at the district level, from the need to involve multiple stakeholders, from the need to work and empower the capacity of homeowner associations, and really to tackle some of these very challenging questions around private ownership, around rented, around gentrification, and so on. So on that note, can I just thank everyone today. It's been fascinating to listen to all these presentations, fascinating to get comments on the report and from the various stakeholders. And I hope you will be with us for the rest of the conference to develop and discuss these themes in further detail. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you. Next session starts in 15 minutes.
Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, and bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.